Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. My name is Volodymyr Solhub, and right now I'm joined by the World Bank Country Director for Ukraine, Belarus and Moldova, Mr. Qimiao Fan. Mr. Fan, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Mr. Fan, just last week during International Central and Eastern European Investment Conference, you said that Ukraine needs to continue the reforming its energy sector, banking system, corruption fight and judicial reform. And just a day before that conference, Ukrainian parliament failed to pass a whole list of anti-corruption fight laws. In your opinion, where does Ukraine stand on the corruption fight right now?
I think Ukraine has, particularly the new government, since last year, has actually undertaken a lot of reforms which address the corruption issue. Clearly, I think they've done quite a lot of work in the energy sector. The fact that they've increased tariffs significantly, as you know, this has traditionally been a major source of corruption in the Ukrainian economy. By unifying tariffs, making them, there's less opportunity for corruption. Secondly, I think they've got rid of the middleman between Gazprom and Naftogaz. Again, I think this has also been an important source of corruption. And the authorities have also undertaken significant reforms to deregulate business, to reduce number of licenses, permits and inspections. These are all important steps to address the corruption issue. But clearly a lot needs to be done, a lot more needs to be done faster to address the corruption issue. This is particularly so in the judicial sector. If you don't have an independent judiciary, it's going to be much, much more difficult to fight corruption.
Well, Mr. Fan, again, going back to the corruption, the Ukrainian government has more than a year and a half since the end of the Euromaidan revolution, which took place because of the people of Ukraine did not want to stand with corruption, with corrupt officials. Yet at the same time, we see that not enough is being done, and as you have just correctly said, nothing is being done. Not enough is being done in a timely manner. So it should be the reforms should be done faster. So. And this is the same which the EU is saying, that this list of laws which the EU was expecting the Ukrainian parliament to pass, they did not see that. So do you really see that the government has the political will to fight with corruption?
I think, obviously, given the depth of corruption, it's very much ingrained in the culture and in the daily life of Ukraine for years. It's going to take concerted effort to address that issue. But also I think it's very important to recognize that to address corruption, to fight corruption effectively, you need all parts of society and all parts of the state, the government, the presidential administration, the parliament and the judiciary, as well as civil society, all working together to address that issue. So it's not one person or one part of the government. Clearly, I think a lot more effort will need to be put into fighting corruption, and that effort needs to be a united effort.
Well, obviously, there is the demand and there is an effort on the part of the civil society. There is even some effort on the part of the parliament. But as some of the organizations said, for example, early in October, the Assistant Secretary of State on Eurasian Affairs, Ms. Victoria Nuland, and then just last week, Transparency International Ukraine directly accused the Prosecutor General and with the silent consent of the president of outright sabotaging the reforms and the corruption fight in Ukraine.
I think what you are going to say is that, fighting corruption is about taking away vested interests. Clearly, you are going to face resistance from those vested interests. Therefore, I think it's very important that all parts of the state are united in fighting corruption.
Mr. Fan, if we could talk a little bit about the economy. A couple of weeks ago, the World Bank released a statement where you projected the real GDP to fall in Ukraine next year by 12%, as opposed to previously projected 7.5%. What are your prospects on, what are your views on the prospects of Ukraine's economy next year? Because obviously right now the economy is in crumbles.
Yeah. What we have forecasted is that this year, 2015, GDP is likely to decline by about 12%. Next year, we actually projected that GDP may rebound by about 1%. Clearly, you're faced with both the external slowdown in demand. You've had, obviously, the domestic policies, which have reduced real consumption. You've also had the conflict in the East, which have also impacted significantly on economic activities in Ukraine. Given all of these, clearly the economy has declined a lot more than we had originally thought earlier in the year. This is largely because of the intensification of the conflict early in the year and in the summer. There is a lot of criticism in Ukraine from the civil society on the part of the national bank on improperly regulating the currency, the Ukraine's currency, and largely faulting the national bank on the huge devaluation of Ukraine's currency. What would you say the national bank is doing incorrectly in this respect? I think the National Bank of Ukraine has actually done a tremendous job in the last year and a half. They have managed to stabilize the foreign exchange market. I think it's very, very important to recognize that you needed to have a flexible exchange rate to absorb all the shocks that is coming to the economy. It's also very, very important that the banking sector is cleaned up. I think it's clear that this is one area where actually I think the Ukrainian authorities have undertaken a tremendous effort. And by cleaned up, do you mean the getting rid of defaulting banks? I think, yes, they have put now almost 1/3 of the banking system into the Deposit Guarantee Fund for liquidation. As you know very well, that many of Ukraine's banks were what I would call pocket banks. They were set up by particular businesses to serve their own interests. Clearly that a lot of these banks have gone bankrupt and they need to be cleaned up. The other important point to make here is that I think this is actually the first time where ordinary Ukrainians are getting their guaranteed deposits back when a bank fails through the Deposit Guarantee Fund. That is very critical to maintain stability and confidence in the banking sector. Understood. Mr. Fan, just again, last week, the World Bank approved $560 million US dollars to finance the road sector development project in Ukraine. And it's a huge project, which is intended to last for 6 years until 2021. How does the World Bank make sure that the funds are being used properly? Well, that's an excellent question. I think, first of all, we have zero tolerance for corruption, particularly in projects that we finance. Second, at the project level, we have a very strict system of procurement and financial management that's been put in place in every project we finance. All our procurement follows international competitive bidding processes, and all accounts of project entities need to be audited. So we need to make sure that every penny is spent precisely as intended. So I think it's for us, this is a critically important issue. And of course, we have staff here on the ground. We supervise the implementation of these projects very closely. And lastly, let me be very clear that if and when people are caught having corrupt or collusive practices in the implementation of projects financed by the World Bank, we will investigate them and we'll take remedial actions against them.
Yeah, but Mr. Fan, how can you tell us a little bit? Can you walk a little bit about through this process? How does the money flow? Do you loan it to the government? So it's the government who's spending the money, not the World Bank. So how do you control who the government procures the services from?
Well, we have, as I said, when the government borrows that money from us, they also enter into an agreement with us on how this money should be spent. There is a process on how procurement is done. We do not release the money until we are sure that the process is done properly, and we will need to look at the contracts. There are contracts that are signed by the government with the suppliers and other contractors, but we review each and every of these major contracts. As I said, we do not release the money until we are sure that this process is properly done and the contracts are real and the work is done.
So basically, because obviously in most cases the money laundering, at least in Ukraine, happens when the government procures services which cost much less, but the government pays much more. So what you were saying, that in this particular project you will be supervising all the contractors and you will be checking all the value of their services.
Absolutely, not just in this project. In every project the World Bank finances, there is a clear set of rules, processes, and procedures in place to make sure that every penny is spent as intended.
Understood. Well, Mr. Fan, let's hope that this indeed works out for the Ukrainian government really well. Many thanks for finding the time to come and talk to us. It was a real pleasure talking to you. This has been Volodymyr Masulov for Viewpoint, together with the World Bank Director for Ukraine, Belarus and Moldova, Ms. Qimiao Fan. Thank you for watching us.